Afternoon. Okay, right, well. Okay, I'm Mark Taylor. I'm the HSES Director for Centrica, Distributed Energy Power and Energy Marketing Trading. So there's a few apologies. As you may note, my first language isn't English, it's Hull. Okay. And the second one, really, apologies. I often walk around when I'm talking, but you've engineered that out today, so well done. And the third one, really, is that I'm only 1 year into the industry. I don't have a technical background. I'm actually an industrial and occupational psychologist who specialised in safety. And you may start thinking, well, what's psychology got to do with something that's very engineering based? Well, hopefully that'll come clear during the course of the conversation this afternoon. So moving on, press the right button. Quite often, we look at asset management and, people talk about physical assets and the engineering. And I'm just going to pose a question to the group. Is this focus correct? And the reason I pose that question is really down to what we can learn from disasters. We've unfortunately, as I say, I used to be in the upstream part of the business where I've been a VP for HSE, and there's lots of technology and technical know-how. But when you look at some of the major disasters that have happened, your Piper Alpha, everyone remember Piper Alpha? Yeah, that was the big burning thing on the screens many years in the 1980s. Who remembers Challenger? Yeah, see some hands, or is it too tiring now? Okay, we're getting there. And then years later, Columbia. And these are assets for NASA, really. And really, what was the common theme between those? Because they're all very different technically. But actually, when you look at the reasons behind some of those disasters, it's safety culture and behaviour played an equal, if not more prominent role than any technical failure. So, really, where does this kind of blend into asset management? Well, let's just start by talking a little bit about human error and asset management. And typically, when you look at accidents, 95% of accidents are linked to human error. So when you've got people doing installs or fitting, or from the case study today, human error will have played a part. And then we start looking at the types of errors. So is it a memory slip? Is it a lapse of attention? Is it a knowledge or rule-based mistake? Or is it a violation? Has somebody broken a given rule? And if so, why? Now, the key thing about this is quite often there's a bit of a misconception when it comes to human error. And the misconception is it's all about the front line. It's all about the mistake that the individual made at the point of risk. Again, when we start looking at these things, and especially if we relate it back to the Reason Swiss cheese model, are you all familiar with that model? Yeah. Good model. And we all look at the active failure. But how often do we actually go back and say, what was the latent condition? Because those things are related to decision making. And I'm sorry I can't share an industry example as such, but I can remember back in the 1990s with helicopters, the oil price was down at $14 a barrel. That was the end of the oil and gas industry in the North Sea, and therefore we're going to need less people, and therefore we're going to have less helicopters. Of course, the industry went through a boom, and there was a big fog patch in early 2000, and we had 5,000 people stranded because there weren't enough helicopters. Well, that traced back to the original decision years later. So the decision was right at the time, but moving forward, conditions changed, and the decision was never reviewed. So really, it's about some of the decision making, and that's where it starts to play into asset management and the things that you acquire, the things that you dispose of, and the decisions you're making about how you manage those risks. So rather than talking about the person mishandling a tool or the misconnection, when we start talking about decision making, we get into a completely different area. Gus today talked about creeping change. There's a phenomenon called change blindness, and if you look at this photograph here, it's a very strong human error. So in this example here, what was happening was somebody was asking for directions, and a member of the public was kindly giving those directions, and all of a sudden some very rude people would interrupt them with a board, cut in between the person asking for the directions and the person giving the directions, and then they would carry on speaking to the person. Actually, what was happening, as you can see, the person was changing out, so they were giving directions to a completely different person and didn't recognise that. Yeah? So this is a phenomenon called change blindness, but it happens with decision making. Another key problem that we face is the illusion of knowledge. Our knowledge is not complete. And basically the man plays a trick. It fills in the gaps. So we think we know what we know, and it ain't so. Then we got another problem, because with all our inspections and all our KPIs and things that we can measure, we're quite often suffering from another problem called confirmation bias, where we think we know what the truth looks like and we seek information that confirms the truth rather than seeking contraindications. So I just wanted to take away about the psychology of asset management, and we see it in other places where we start talking more about the psychology of process safety, that decision making about the way we decide to manage an asset can actually blind us to risk. And change is always one of those fundamental things where we can start to fail to see things. So just to put this in context, distributed energy and power, so I've only been with the company for a year, and I've come in at a massive change where we were doing power generation and we were an energy company. We have an E&P business, we have a power generation company. But DE&P, for example, is distributed energy and power. And there's been some massive changes to our strategy. It's one word in the strategy, but it's made a massive difference to our risk profile. So we've moved from energy to energy and services. And that's meant some changes to our assets. We've disposed of our renewable assets. And that causes some issues and challenges because you've got people there who start being concerned about their job and their welfare, what's there for the future. And that, again, can affect the way things are managed safely. And we've disposed of our large power assets as well. We've just recently got rid of Langage and Humber Power. But also on the flip side, we've had acquisitions of assets. We've bought other businesses. And they have brought with it this completely different risk profile. So with a move to distributed energy, we're doing things like installing solar panels. We're putting in combined heat and power generators. We're installing software for insights so customers can manage their power more effectively. We're looking at optimization. So there's a key part about that is that we've got more interface with our customers. We are truly a customer-facing business. So, it will press the right button. In terms of some of the challenges we've now faced, really it's the different cultures and processes that we're starting to look at as we're bringing new companies. We buy a good company with a solid offering, and then we bring the big might of Centrica to it. Wow, well, we always know best, don't we? And I've lived through a few acquisitions. And, the problem here is you've got a company that's neat and agile, and then we start imposing our big systems on it, and that can cause a massive problem. And sometimes we can fail to learn what that other company could have taught us. And quite often we can drown a company with over complex procedures. Another thing that you've got to remember in our field, one of our challenges, is that customers have a very different perspective. We've moved from a situation where, you have a power generation asset and you control all the asset there, you control the land, you control the access, to a point now where we're actually getting into more of the customer's premises. So we're now actually building energy solutions within a client premises. And, when it comes to things like energy isolation, a hospital really is more focused on its patients. I'm glad to say it, by the way. But it does pose other problems because of things like how do they manage isolations? How, if you're doing a piece of work, you've got your systems, how do you know there's not an action on the client side that is going to breach your line of defence and lead someone to being hurt? If you've got a hotel, they really want to look after their customers, and so they should. They're paying a lot of money to stay in these hotels. Or if you've got a multiple occupancy building, the landlord might not want to switch off a live system. So those are the types of challenges that we're starting to face there. I think also one of the key things is a change in terms of our technical focus. And I also look after energy marketing trading as part of my job, and it's very easy how you can wander into things. 1 minute they're just trading energy, the next minute, we will trade LNG. And all of a sudden, you've got these other things, they're called ships, LNG tankers. And, without knowing it, there's a whole different risk profile there. So with vessels, you've got things like safe route, you've got threats of piracy, threats of terrorism, all that type of good stuff. And you're sending these thermos flasks full of LNG to a facility to reprocess it. And what we're sending it to, the traders want the spot cargo, they want the deal. But equally, within distributed energy, we face some challenges because, as you had Gus talk earlier, we have an E&P business, and process safety is a key element of managing that risk. And to an extent, I would also say the same for power generation. We class them as a hill risk, high impact, low likelihood, because they are very different for an offshore facility. But all of a sudden now, we've got a new problem. Because really what we've got to look at is product safety. In much of the same things that the gentleman prior to me was mentioning, all of a sudden there's this change from, just installing something. So if you imagine you put a CHP into a client's facility, into an enclosure, and there's a mains gas leak, and now we've got a hydrocarbon floating around in an enclosure, and there's this nice source of ignition from your CHP. How will your CHP perform? Will it shut down? Will it shut down in time? Will it vent? What will it do? So all these types of questions. So we've had to start thinking more from a product life cycle management, right through to things from concept risk assessment, where we're looking at the design, taking into account misuse by customers, looking at things such as the types and different environments that we're looking at, right down to, okay, we're now going to produce something. What's the producer, what's the manufacturing agreement looking like? Because, if manufacturers want to earn a bit more money, they'll try and change the design, try and change the material, try and go change your location. All these things can impact your product quality and ultimately put your customer at risk. I think on the last point, and I think this is really one, seems to be a common thread, is contractors with different safety cultures and views on management of risk. We're an international business. I would say the quality of contractors in the UK generally good. I think that's a fair comment. But do you get the same when you're working in parts of Europe? Where the new contractors are just starting up and everything else, and how do you assess and how do you develop them? We may not always be in a position to select the contract that will meet all the criteria. So what is it we've got to do with those contractors to bring them up to a standard, which will mean that they'll perform safely? And I think that's one of our key challenges, if I'm honest, because they are an extension of your organisation, and they can dramatically impact safety at the point of risk in terms of quality of an installation and the behaviours they take on board. So just thinking back through memory, one of our high potential incidents is where a contractor over in the US basically was doing work without arc flash protection equipment, and it was our customer who intervened and let us know. So there's all this question about how we control contractors, how we qualify them, and then how do we assure ourselves that they are performing to a standard that is acceptable to us. So really, I think this kind of brings us on to a couple of questions, really. And I hope you don't mind me taking the liberty and taking us around the cultural approach. But in a more integrated approach to energy, with more customer interfaces, my question would be, how can assets be managed safely? We're given something quite often we might not have complete control. It depends on the agreement, whether you have an O&M agreement or you're just sending the box and leaving the customer with it. So the question is, how do we manage assets in that completely different and complex environment? And the other question I would then pose to you is, with the potential for greater degrees of separation, such as the use of third-party contracts, how can the point of risk be controlled more effectively? Okay, thank you. And now I believe I'm the victim of questions.
Some questions, if you want. Mark.
Some questions. Well, I'll just hand them over to Tanisha. She said she'll take the questions for me.
No questions. That's good.
Right, okay. Obviously very comprehensive. Thank you.
So now we've got a bit of time through until 2:45, and it's 1:15 now, so that's half an hour. So I'll probably give you 20 minutes to have a chat, and then 10 minutes where we can feedback what we think about things. Having a chat, there's some of you that are only like a couple of people on one table, so move around the tables and get yourselves in decent sized groups. I don't think there's a table with just one person on, that's normally the table I'm on, but don't worry about that. And I think we'll leave those questions up there, because they're quite useful questions, probably from the context of a DNO moving to be a DSO, whatever that means, I don't think we know yet, but moving to a time where we're operating our asset in a more integrated way with other providers and providing a service rather than an asset, which was part of the theme this morning. And coming out of the cutouts thing, I think there's a couple of questions that I'd like you to consider. The first is, you've heard the thing that we're doing through the ENA and the sort of position that we're taking with this change to the fact that suppliers won't be visiting meter positions and cutouts. So do you think we're doing enough, is the first thing. So is there enough in what the ENA approach is for the industry? And the second thing, which ties into Ian's question earlier, is what do you think we should do after the smart meter rollout? I think we all know what we're going to do through the smart meter rollout, deal with defects and build an asset database, but what should we do afterwards? So that's the questions. Form yourselves into groups, and just after past, we will see if we can get some answers to those questions. Thank you.